Dillon Gabriel's sudden elevation to starting quarterback didn't sit right with everyone inside the Cleveland Browns facility, and for good. Shedeur Sanders, despite outperforming expectations both in practice and in community engagement, continues to find himself quietly edged out of game-time opportunities. The timing of a mysterious back injury and the shifting depth chart, all while Sanders remains physically prepared and mentally focused, has sparked a growing chorus of insiders questioning whether merit was ever the deciding factor.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
It's not just about football anymore. It's about a pattern of decision-making that seems less about winning and more about protecting reputations. The video unpacks a troubling narrative that Kevin Stefanski and other organizational figures are using their positions to orchestrate a strategic suppression of Sanders, driven by insecurity and fear of disruption to the team's carefully maintained hierarchy. Sanders' authentic leadership and connection to local communities stand in stark contrast to the sanitized, controllable image the organization appears to prefer. Rather than embracing his influence, they're working to minimize it, using tactics that are subtle, systemic, and hard to prove but deeply damaging. Eventually, that suppression will unravel, and when it does, those responsible for holding back real talent and integrity will have to answer for it. The silence from the Cleveland Browns is louder than any statement they could give. And now, after months of quiet maneuvering, questionable decisions, and thinly veiled excuses, the narrative is slipping out of their hands and landing squarely in the public spotlight. The story around Shedeur Sanders is no longer about potential. It's about power. And how that power is being actively suppressed by an organization terrified of losing control. The leaks didn't just reveal tension. They exposed a calculated operation. A string of decisions and patterns that, when viewed individually, might look like standard football politics. But when lined up together, they point to something far more deliberate. An effort to keep Sanders sidelined not because of ability or injury but because of ego. It starts with the depth chart. Sanders wasn't just bumped down. He was buried. Week after week, the internal narrative shifted just enough to make it look like strategy, developmental time, adapting to the system, building rapport. But none of that held up when the evidence started piling up. Sanders had been performing well in practice, showing command in team meetings, earning praise from teammates. There was no visible reason for him not to get reps. Unless the goal wasn't development, but disappearance. The so-called back injury added another layer. It was convenient, vague. A lingering issue that never quite got resolved but always seemed to reappear when questions got too loud. Not serious enough to put him on injured reserve. Not defined enough to demand a real update. Just enough to keep him off the field and out of the conversation. And then there's the play calling. The selective use of certain formations when Sanders was even remotely in the mix. The lack of opportunity in key game situations. The decisions that felt like they were designed to protect something, or someone, other than the team's actual success. Which brings us to Kevin Stefanski. Because this didn't happen in a vacuum. This wasn't some random series of coincidences. The pattern runs through the coaching staff, and at the center of that is Stefanski. The leaks suggest this isn't just about what's best for the team. It's about preserving his structure, his narrative, and ultimately his reputation. Because the second Sanders steps onto that field and delivers, as many believe he will, the question becomes, what were they so afraid of? The answer is simple. They were afraid Sanders would be too good. That his presence would outshine the players handpicked by this regime. That his leadership, his maturity, and his community connection would expose just how ineffective the team's current strategy really is. And when a young quarterback starts checking all the boxes on the field and off it, that starts to erode the control of those who've built their positions on predictability. This isn't just a football problem. It's a culture, because while Sanders has been sitting quietly, staying focused, and continuing to lead without spotlight, the organization has been unraveling its own image. They've revealed that leadership, for them, isn't about recognizing character or performance. It's about managing influence, about deciding who gets to rise and who needs to be kept in their place. And nothing challenges that kind of system more than someone who earns respect on his own terms. Sanders' commitment to the community has only made things more complicated for the front office. He's built genuine relationships with fans, especially in underserved neighborhoods. He's shown up without media fanfare. He's supported youth initiatives. He's kept a low profile while making a high impact. But that kind of authenticity doesn't fit the sanitized, distant image that some in the Browns' leadership prefer. They want control over the message. And when someone becomes a face of the franchise through integrity instead of marketing, it threatens to tear down the carefully managed illusion. You can see it in how certain figures in the locker room have responded. According to the leaks, players like Anthony have made it clear they're uncomfortable with Sanders' rising profile. Not because he's done anything wrong, but because his natural charisma and steady focus have started to shift the locker room dynamic. When someone leads without asking for the title, it forces others to confront how they got theirs, and whether they've really earned it. And that's the real issue here. Sanders hasn't been kept off the field because he's a risk. He's been kept off because he's not. Because he represents a better version of leadership than the one currently calling the shots. Because he doesn't need politics to win people over. And that makes him dangerous to a system built on anything but merit. The favoritism toward Dillon Gabriel is another layer to the dysfunction. Gabriel didn't steal the job, he was handed it. He was given room to fail, to settle in, to play under the protective umbrella of a system that sees him as non-threatening. And it shows. The contrast couldn't be more obvious. One quarterback fits the mold but doesn't move the needle. The other changes the conversation without even playing a full game. And it's that conversation the Browns are desperate to avoid. They know that once Sanders takes the field and performs, the backlash will be swift. Fans will demand to know why he was sidelined. Why this talent was kept hidden. Why the people in charge spent more time protecting their own egos than developing the future of the franchise. And once that door opens, there's no closing it. Because this story is no longer just about one player. It's about an organization's values. About what happens when control becomes more important than winning. About how far people will go to keep power, even if it means holding back someone who's already proven he deserves better. Sanders' patience, his work ethic, and his refusal to play into the chaos have only amplified the problem for Cleveland. He hasn't given them anything to weaponize. No angry tweets. No leaks of his own. No sideline tantrums. Just steady, consistent professionalism. And that's what's going to make the eventual fallout even worse. Because when the truth fully breaks through and fans realize just how long this was happening, there's not going to be a scapegoat big enough to absorb the blame. This has been a top-down failure. One driven by insecurity, protected by silence, and exposed by one thing no organization can ever fully control: talent. Because talent always rises. Even when you try to bury it behind PR spin, fake injuries, and selective play calling. Even when you promote others to stay safe. Even when you manipulate the depth chart to buy yourself time. You can't suppress real leadership forever. And that's what Shedeur Sanders is: real leadership. On the field, off the field, and everywhere in between. It's not loud. It's not flashy. But it's effective. And it's coming whether they're ready for it or not. The Browns thought they could delay the truth. But all they've done is prove how scared they are of it. Like this video if you've had enough of the excuses. Share it if you're seeing the same patterns. Comment with your thoughts on what really needs to change in Cleveland. And subscribe to stay locked in, because the moment Sanders gets his chance, the entire narrative flips. And the people who tried to stop it? They'll finally have to answer for what they did. And when that moment finally hits, when Shedeur Sanders steps onto the field, not as a footnote or a fill-in, but as the guy, the panic you're already seeing in Cleveland is going to look like child's play. Because at that point, it's no longer just a roster decision gone wrong. It's a scandal. The kind that redefines how a franchise is viewed across the league. The kind that makes other players look twice before signing. The kind that sticks. The Browns can already feel it. That's why the messaging has gone from vague optimism to nervous hedging. You can tell when a coaching staff is stalling. You can hear it in the recycled answers, in the constant "we'll reevaluate next week," in the carefully choreographed interviews that say a lot while actually saying nothing. They've been trying to manage perception. Control the temperature. Delay the explosion. But the fan base isn't buying it anymore. You can't pretend a quarterback is still learning when the decisions keeping him sidelined are more about preserving hierarchy than developing talent. You can't keep rolling out excuses about injuries that never get explained and never heal on any clear timeline. And you definitely can't keep starting players like Dillon Gabriel, week after week, acting like it's based on performance when the numbers, and the eye test, say otherwise. This is no longer a football strategy. It's self-preservation. Because what's really being protected here isn't the quarterback room. It's the image of those in charge. And that image is crumbling. Kevin Stefanski and the decision-makers around him have made it clear. This isn't about fielding the best team. It's about controlling the narrative around who gets to be the face of the team. And Shedeur Sanders, by all accounts, was never supposed to be that guy. Too confident. Too authentic. Too influential. He doesn't just command respect, he earns it. And that kind of presence in a building where everything is top-down can start to feel like a threat. Not because it's harmful, but because it forces people in power to confront whether they actually deserve the positions they hold. Shedeur isn't the problem. His independence is. The fact that he has fans without a single snap. That his leadership extends beyond the field. That he shows up in the community without being told to. That his focus isn't on branding but on doing the work. These aren't things that should make an organization nervous. These are things that should energize it. But in Cleveland's case, they've become liabilities. The leak said it best. Some in the building feel threatened by Sanders' natural leadership. They don't like that the locker room respects him without being instructed to. They don't like that fans chant his name without being prompted. They don't like that his calm, quiet confidence stands in direct contrast to the insecurity running the team from the top. Because when someone like Sanders rises, people have to ask questions. Why wasn't he playing earlier? Why did it take so long for him to get reps? Why was a talent like this being managed like a PR risk? And the answers to those questions would unravel more than a depth chart. They'd expose an entire operation built on control, not competition. Let's not forget, this is the same organization that watched one of the most poised and disciplined young quarterbacks sit behind a rotating cast of underwhelming starters, all while insisting the decision was about timing. It's not about timing. It's about fear. And they know that the second Sanders takes the field and delivers, they'll have to answer for the months spent pretending he wasn't ready. They'll have to explain the phantom injury, the depth chart games, the playbook familiarity, excuse. They'll have to own the reality that they deliberately held a player back because they were afraid of what he might expose. And that's exactly why they're still stalling. They're not protecting Sanders. They're protecting themselves. Because if he steps in and performs, that's game over for the entire strategy they've used to maintain control. The fans will know. The media will know. The locker room will know. And no amount of polished statements or spin can put that back in the box. That's why the pressure is building. Not just for Sanders to get his shot, but for the truth to come out. The truth about what happens in NFL organizations when real leadership threatens artificial authority. When influence earned outside the walls of corporate branding gets labeled as a distraction. When authenticity is seen as dangerous. Sanders has done everything right. He stayed focused. He's kept working. He hasn't lashed out or aired dirty laundry. He hasn't tried to force a storyline. He's let his work speak for itself. And that's what's made this so uncomfortable for the Browns. Because they've run out of excuses. There's no attitude problem. No drama. No learning curve. Just a quarterback who's been ready, willing, and fully capable, and yet, for some reason, continues to be sidelined. Everyone sees it now. The coaching staff can say whatever they want. The front office can keep holding press conferences. But the credibility is gone. And once that's lost, it's hard to get back. The longer this drags out, the worse the fallout will be. Because when Sanders finally does step in, when he gets even a single chance to show what he can do, the comparison will be brutal. Fans won't just evaluate him. They'll reevaluate every decision that led up to that moment. And if he succeeds, that reevaluation turns into an indictment. An indictment of how many weeks were wasted. Of how many games were mismanaged. Of how many times leadership chose comfort over excellence. And it won't be just Stefanski facing the heat. It'll be everyone who played a role in suppressing Sanders' rise. Everyone who saw his talent, his leadership, his composure, and said, not yet. But not yet is running out of road. Soon it'll be now or never. And the Browns will have to deal with the reality they created, that the very player they tried to hide might just be the one who saves them, or the one who walks away and proves they never deserved him in the first place. Because that's what happens when you suppress greatness for too long. You either lose it, or it turns the spotlight back on you. The clock is ticking. Not just on Shedeur Sanders' inevitable rise, but on the Cleveland Browns organization's ability to contain it. Because let's call it what it is. This isn't about development. It's not about easing him in, or waiting for the right time. It's about obstruction. It's about manipulation. It's about a leadership structure so consumed with protecting its image that it's willing to sideline real talent just to avoid being outshined. And that's exactly what Shedeur Sanders represents. A spotlight they can't dim, a presence they can't spin, a quarterback they can't control. From day one, it's been clear that Sanders had the tools: poise, accuracy, vision, leadership. But what really set him apart, what made certain people in power squirm, was that he didn't wait to be chosen. He earned attention. He became the conversation. without needing endorsements, without needing a carefully crafted narrative. And that's the threat. Because the Browns system isn't built for that kind of player. It's built to reward alignment, not excellence. To promote those who stay in line, not those who stand out. To elevate those who protect the brand, not those who become the brand. So instead of leaning into Sanders' momentum, they hit the brakes. Not with a public confrontation, but with a quiet, systematic slowdown. He got buried on the depth chart. Practice reps got limited. The infamous back injury started showing up just in time to keep him out of critical media windows. And when fans started asking questions, they didn't get answers, they got noise. Just enough confusion to cast doubt. Just enough spin to buy time. But time is no longer on their side. Every week that passes, more people are waking up to what's really happening. More voices are joining the chorus. This isn't a niche controversy anymore. It's becoming the conversation around the Browns. And it's not going away until the team gives a real answer. Not a quote. Not a soundbite. A real answer. Why is Shedeur Sanders being sidelined when all signs point to readiness? Why is a quarterback with proven leadership and community impact being treated like a locker room risk? Why does it feel like every move around him is about protecting others, not developing him? These are not questions you can bury under football jargon. These are not questions you answer with, "We're evaluating." These are questions that demand accountability. And that's exactly what this organization is trying to avoid. Because accountability would mean admitting that this isn't about Sanders at all, it's about them. About a leadership team that sees a player's independence as insubordination. That views community outreach as a threat to brand control. That considers charisma dangerous if it's not coming from one of their hand-picked poster boys. It's about a coach who's more worried about maintaining hierarchy than building momentum. A front office more concerned with optics than outcomes. A system so tightly managed that it collapses under the weight of any player who doesn't play by its unspoken rules. And Shedeur? He's breaking every one of them just by being himself. He's not loud. He's not flashy. But he's undeniable. And that's the part that's impossible to suppress. Because you can bench a player. You can manipulate the injury report. You can play politics with the media. But what you can't do is make people unsee what they've already recognized. Sanders is the kind of leader this team needs. The kind who shows up when no one's watching. Who mentors teammates without making a spectacle. Who invests in the city without needing a press release. Who earns respect without demanding it. That's what makes this whole situation so backward. Most teams would kill for a player like this. Most coaches would be desperate to get someone like Sanders on the field. But in Cleveland, he's being treated like a liability. Not because of who he is, but because of what he might prove. That he's better than the guy they backed. That he's more stable than the culture they've built. That he's the real future and they missed it, on purpose. And the fans? They see it. They see a quarterback who's done everything right and still been kept out. They see a coaching staff scrambling to justify the unjustifiable. They see a front office treating their own fan base like it can't handle the truth. But the truth is already out there. It's in the empty explanations. It's in the tension during press conferences. It's in the way the team avoids even saying Sanders' name when asked about quarterback depth. It's in the silence. The long, calculated silences that only come when you're trying not to say the wrong thing because you already know you're in the wrong. The writing's on the wall. If Sanders takes the field and performs, even once, everything unravels. Every excuse. Every manipulated rotation. Every claim that this was all part of some long-term plan. Because no one believes that anymore. Not the fans. Not the locker room. And increasingly, not even the media. And that's the panic you're seeing now. Not just from Stefanski but from the entire chain of command. Because they didn't just mismanage a quarterback, they got exposed for what this really was. A suppression of leadership driven by ego and fear. And it's not just embarrassing. It's career-threatening. When that moment comes, and it will, there won't be enough spin in the world to explain why Shedeur Sanders was treated like a problem instead of a solution. And the legacy damage will be permanent. This wasn't a personnel mistake. It was a philosophical one. A choice to prioritize control over culture. A decision to manage leadership instead of empowering it. An institutional failure to recognize that the future doesn't wait for permission. It walks in and takes the room. That's what Shedeur did. And that's why they've been trying so hard to keep him in the shadows. But shadows don't hold forever. The spotlight is coming. And when it hits, the ones who tried to keep it off him are going to be the ones burning under it. And the most ironic part? They did all this to avoid a disruption. To keep the waters calm. to avoid controversy, to preserve the status quo and maintain their grip on the narrative. But in doing so, they created the exact opposite. They lit the match themselves. And now the smoke is pouring out of Berea like a four-alarm fire. Because the fans aren't staying quiet anymore. They've connected the dots. They've watched the tape. They've seen Dylan Gabriel trot out week after week with barely average performances while Sanders waits on the sidelines, treated like a footnote in his own story. And the fanbase is livid. They're not asking if Shedeur is the better option anymore. They're asking what kind of organization watches a leader like him, grounded, mature, unshaken by media noise, deeply involved in the community, and decides to turn that into a threat. And don't think the locker room hasn't noticed. Players talk. They see the inconsistency. They know who the natural leaders are. They feel who brings real presence to a huddle. They understand when someone's being shut out for reasons that have nothing to do with football. That kind of decision-making? It erodes trust from the inside out. And when trust breaks, culture follows. It's wild that the Browns had a shot at rewriting their reputation. At finally turning a corner, not just on the field but in how they handle real leadership. But instead they chose image management over growth. They chose to protect fragile egos rather than embrace the strength standing right in front of them. And the longer they try to keep Shedeur quiet, the louder this storm gets. So here's the real question. What's the end game? They can't hide forever. Eventually, injuries, losses, or just plain public pressure will force their hand. And when Sanders finally steps into that pocket, all the manipulation, all the subtle suppression, all the orchestrated diversions, they'll all be judged in that one moment. Because if he shines, and he likely will, the entire house of cards falls. That's what they're afraid of. That's why the panic is setting in. Not because Sanders isn't ready, but because he is. And they know it. Like this if you've seen through the noise. Share it if you believe talent should never be silenced. Drop your thoughts in the comments if you're tired of ego getting in the way of greatness. And hit subscribe, because the moment they finally let Shedeur speak with his game, that's when the real reckoning begins.